Welcome to Innovation Pulse, your quick, no-nonsense update covering the latest in startups and entrepreneurship news. Anthropic, an AI company founded by former OpenAI researchers, has secured a $2.5 billion credit line, while Affiniti is transforming expense management software for small businesses with innovative tech. After this, we will dive deep into measuring software developer productivity and its impact on the tech industry. Anthropic, an AI company founded by former OpenAI researchers, recently secured a $2.5 billion, five-year revolving credit line to bolster its position in the rapidly evolving AI market. Known for its Claude chatbot launched in March 2023, Anthropic has swiftly scaled its operations, achieving an annualized revenue of $2 billion in the first quarter, doubling from the previous period. This financial boost aids Anthropic's expansion and strengthens its balance sheet amidst the intense AI competition. With a recent valuation of $61.5 billion, the company is seeing a surge in high-value customers, with those spending over $100,000 annually increasing eightfold from the previous year. Major financial institutions like Morgan Stanley, Barclays, and JP Morgan are backing this credit facility, showcasing confidence in Anthropic's business model and mission. As the AI sector races towards a projected $1 trillion revenue within a decade, Anthropic's strategic financial moves position it uniquely in the competitive landscape, enabling it to keep pace with industry giants like Google, Amazon, and OpenAI in the quest to develop advanced AI agents. Affiniti, founded by Aaron Bai and Sahil Fadnis, is revolutionizing expense management software for small businesses, offering features traditionally enjoyed by tech startups. After raising an $11 million seed round, they quickly secured a $17 million Series A, led by Signalfire. Affiniti targets small and mid-sized businesses like pharmacies and auto dealerships, providing them with customizable expense management credit cards and software. Unlike traditional options from banks like American Express, Affiniti delivers what Bai calls V3 FinTech, which not only improves UX and data access, but also offers analytics and financial advice, crucial for businesses lacking finance teams. The Series A funding will enable Affiniti to introduce features like banking, bill pay, and cash flow analytics, and integrate with enterprise and point-of-sale apps. Current offerings include customized cashback rewards, native QuickBooks files, and short-term loans against invoices. Instead of broad targeting, Affiniti focuses on niche verticals with complex cash flow, achieving rapid growth to 1,800 customers and $20 million in monthly transaction volume. The platform is on track to handle $1 billion in transactions by year-end, with revenue growth around tenfold in a year. And now, pivot our discussion towards the main entrepreneurship topic.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Innovation Pulse. I'm your host, Donna, and I'm joined as always by my brilliant co-host, Yakov Lasker. Today, we're diving into a topic that's been causing quite a stir in engineering departments everywhere. Yakov, why don't you set the stage for us?
Thanks, Donna. Today, we're tackling the thorny question of measuring developer productivity. Companies are obsessed with metrics these days, but when it comes to software development, can you really capture a developer's effectiveness with numbers? Is counting lines of code like measuring an aircraft's progress by weight?
Oh, I love that analogy. Was that Bill Gates who said that?
Spot on! Gates made that comparison to highlight how misleading pure code volume can be. And he's not alone in being skeptical. Martin Fowler, that guru from ThoughtWorks, argues we fundamentally have no way of reasonably measuring software developer productivity.
Yet companies keep trying. I was talking to a CTO last week who's tracking everything from commit counts to story points per developer. I couldn't help but wonder if that approach is helping or actually hurting their team.
That's exactly the tension. Let's break down some of these common metrics. First up is the classic lines of code, or LOC. Simple to count, gives you a rough indicator of system size, but
But completely misses the point of good code, right? I remember a senior developer telling me her proudest achievement was deleting 2,000 lines of code while keeping all the functionality. Under a LOC metric, that would look like negative productivity.
exactly. As Fowler points out, a good developer might achieve in 10,000 lines what another does in 100,000. The shorter version isn't less productive, it's just more elegant and probably easier to maintain.
What about commit counts and pull requests? I see those on dashboards all the time.
Ah, the green squares on GitHub. The problem is they're easily gamed. One engineering leader noted that after they started tracking commit counts, developers suddenly started splitting changes into extra commits. One change, 5 commits. Tada, productivity quintupled. On paper, anyway.
I've totally seen that happen. So what about story points? That's supposed to be more meaningful, right?
Story points are interesting because they were designed for team estimation, not individual performance. Scrum experts are actually quite emphatic about this. One quote from scrum.org stands out. If you start measuring individual performance by story points, it's game over. This will crush the spirit of teamwork.
That makes sense. If I'm measured on my personal point quota, why would I stop to help a colleague? I'd be shooting myself in the foot metrics wise.
Exactly. This leads to a broader cultural problem with individual metrics. They can create a competitive environment where knowledge sharing takes a back seat. I've seen teams where developers hoard tasks or avoid helping others because they're worried about their own numbers.
That sounds toxic. What about the psychological impact? Do we know how developers feel about being measured this way?
There's a telling anecdote about that. When one CTO suggested tracking commit counts, a senior engineer called it garbage and warned that no developer would want to be measured like this. Engineering is creative work. Imagine if we tracked an artist's productivity by counting brushstrokes.
Congratulations, Picasso. You've hit your KPI of 500 brushstrokes today. Keep it up and you might earn that bonus.
Exactly. And this brings us to Goodhart's law, which warns that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. People will change their behavior to hit the metrics, often in ways that aren't actually helpful.
Like splitting commits or inflating story point estimates?
Precisely. Or rushing through bug fixes without addressing root causes, just to close more tickets. One engineering blog gave the example that focusing too much on bug count could drive teams to favor quick and dirty fixes, creating technical debt that will cause bigger problems down the road.
So are all metrics bad news? Should we just throw our dashboards out the window?
Not necessarily. The consensus from industry leaders seems to be that metrics can be valuable if used wisely. McKinsey's 2023 report claims that, yes, you can measure developer productivity, but not with one magic number. You need a balanced approach.
What does a balanced approach look like?
There's this framework called SPACE that I find really helpful. It stands for satisfaction, performance, activity, communication, collaboration, and efficiency. The idea is to look at multiple dimensions rather than fixating on just activity metrics like commits or PRs.
I like that holistic view. So satisfaction would be like, are developers happy and engaged? And performance would be actual outcomes like features shipped or customer impact.
You've got it. And then communication metrics might track how well developers collaborate. Things like code review participation. By looking at all these dimensions together, you get a much more realistic picture than any single metric could provide.
You know what I've been wondering throughout this conversation, Yakov? We're talking about how challenging it is to measure individual developer productivity, but I've worked with sales and marketing teams where individual metrics seem to work just fine. Why is software development so different?
That's a fantastic question, Donna. Software development is fundamentally different from departments like sales, support, and marketing, where individual leading indicators tend to be much more useful and effective.
Tell me more about that. I mean, sales has quotas, marketing has lead generation targets, customer support has tickets resolved, all individual metrics that seem to work reasonably well.
Right. In those departments, there's often a clearer line between individual effort and outcome. A salesperson closes a deal. That's countable revenue directly tied to their work. A support rep resolves a ticket. That's one customer problem solved. These are relatively atomic, discrete tasks where one person's contribution is easy to isolate.
And I'm guessing software development isn't like that?
Not at all. Software development is inherently collaborative and interconnected. The code I write today might be building on someone else's foundation from 6 months ago. Or my contribution might be reviewing and improving another developer's work rather than writing new code myself.
So in sales, if I make 100 calls and close 10 deals, that's clearly my work. But in development, if a feature ships, it's usually the result of multiple people's contributions.
Exactly. And the value of those contributions isn't always immediately apparent. A developer might spend weeks refactoring code that doesn't add any visible features but prevents future bugs and makes the next 10 features easier to implement. How do you measure that impact?
I see what you're saying. In marketing, if I run a campaign that generates 500 leads, that's a clear metric. But in development, sometimes the most valuable work isn't easily quantifiable.
Precisely, and there's another fundamental difference. In sales or support, the work tends to be more homogeneous. One sale is comparable to another. One support ticket follows similar patterns. But in development, every problem can be unique. The time it takes to build feature A versus feature B might differ by 10x, not because of developer skill, but because of inherent complexity.
So applying the same metric across different types of development work is like comparing apples to quantum physics?
That's not far off. And here's another angle. In sales or marketing, the time horizon is relatively short. You make a call, you close a deal, you run a campaign, you count the leads. But in software, the true value of work might not be apparent for months or years.
Speaking of different contexts, I'm curious about how company size affects these metrics. Do large enterprises and small startups approach developer metrics differently?
Absolutely. In large enterprises, leaders often seek metrics to gain visibility across many teams and projects. They tend to focus on process efficiency and consistency using standardized frameworks.
Like those DORA metrics? Deployment frequency, lead time, and reliability?
Exactly. Large organizations can use those to benchmark teams against industry standards. They also typically track quality metrics like defect rates and product value metrics, like features delivered to ensure productivity translates into business impact.
But I imagine implementing metrics in a 5,000-person engineering org is quite different from a 20-person startup.
Completely different. Big companies often have dedicated teams measuring developer experience with sophisticated dashboards to find systemic bottlenecks like slow build times or excessive meetings. They need that structure to manage complexity.
What about the risks? I would think larger organizations might be more tempted to misuse these metrics.
That's a real concern. With hundreds of developers, there's definitely temptation to rank people by numbers. That's why forward-thinking enterprises use metrics to identify teams that need help rather than singling out low-performing individuals. Privacy and trust become even more crucial at scale.
And for smaller teams and startups?
They typically prioritize speed of delivery and customer feedback above all. Their metrics tend to be more outcome-focused: user adoption, feature completion, or revenue impact per engineer, rather than internal process metrics.
I guess when you have a 10-person team, everyone's contributions are pretty visible day to day.
Exactly. Startups rely more on direct observation and conversations than dashboards. They might track something simple like lead time per feature or error rates, but these are typically discussed in all-hands meetings rather than formal reports.
It seems like small teams can be more flexible and qualitative in their approach.
Absolutely, they should avoid over-bureaucratizing metrics. Rigid KPIs introduced too early can reduce the flexibility and creativity that small teams thrive on. As small teams pivot quickly, their metric frameworks should stay nimble, focus on a few key indicators rather than drowning in data.
Speaking of complexity in measuring developer productivity, there's a massive elephant in the room we haven't addressed yet. AI assisted coding tools like GitHub Copilot and Claude are completely changing the game. How does that fit into our metrics conversation?
Oh wow, that's such a timely point, Donna. AI coding assistants are turning traditional developer metrics on their head. Just when companies thought they had figured out how to measure productivity, along comes AI to complicate everything.
Right? Imagine trying to measure a developer's output when they can generate 200 lines of code with a well crafted prompt. Lines of code as a metric just got even more meaningless.
Absolutely. And the variability is huge. Two developers might solve the same problem, but one uses AI effectively and produces a solution in 20 minutes, while the other takes 3 hours coding everything manually. Both solutions work equally well, so who was more productive?
It's a fascinating question. In some ways, developer work might be shifting toward prompt engineering and solution architecture rather than manual coding.
I think you've hit on something important there. The metric that matters might be becoming time to solution rather than volume of code written. The best developers might actually write very little code themselves in the future. Instead, they'll excel at directing AI to generate well-structured, maintainable code.
So, in a way, AI might be making individual metrics even less useful, since the actual coding is being partially outsourced to the AI.
In some ways, yes, but it also raises new questions about what skills we should be measuring. Maybe instead of tracking code volume, we should be looking at a developer's ability to effectively leverage these new tools. Their AI utilization effectiveness, if you will.
I can already see the next wave of dashboards: AI Prompt Efficiency Index and Copilot Utilization Rate.
Please don't give them ideas.
It sounds like the rise of AI in coding makes us need to focus even more on outcomes rather than output. Did the problem get solved? Is the solution maintainable? Does it meet requirements? Those questions matter more than how the code came to be.
You've nailed it. It's pushing us toward what we should have been measuring all along, the impact and value of the solution, not the mechanical process of producing it. Maybe AI is forcing a healthy recalibration of our metrics.
So, what advice would you give to engineering leaders navigating this new AI assisted development landscape?
I'd say embrace the change rather than fight it. Accept that traditional individual metrics like lines of code are becoming even less relevant. Focus on measuring outcomes and impacts, working software, customer value, problem resolution, and create a culture where using AI effectively is celebrated rather than hidden.
And from a metrics perspective?
Consider developing new frameworks that account for this hybrid human-AI coding environment. Maybe what we should measure is a developer's ability to break down problems effectively, to know when to code manually versus when to leverage AI, and to evaluate and refine AI-generated solutions. These meta skills might become the new productivity differentiators.
Fascinating. So, the metrics themselves need to evolve alongside the technology.
Exactly, and organizations that cling to outdated metrics will not only get misleading data, they might actively discourage the effective use of these powerful new tools.
This conversation reminds me of the principle that what you measure is what you get. If we measure individual output alone, we get individualism. If we measure team outcomes and collaboration, we get teamwork.
That's really the heart of it. No metric is neutral. Each one sends a signal about what the organization values. So choose metrics that align with your true goals and culture. If you value knowledge sharing and quality, don't just measure raw output.
And remember that context matters. A developer tackling a complex, critical task might close fewer tickets or write less code. Yet their contribution could be more valuable than someone churning through trivial changes.
Absolutely. As Alan Holub put it, focusing too much on raw productivity numbers destroys the careers of highly productive people who happen to be working on very hard problems.
So, what should tech leaders take away from all this?
I'd say there are 3 key takeaways. First, be wary of any single metric claiming to capture developer productivity, especially individual metrics like lines of code or commit counts. Second, focus more on team outcomes and business impact than raw activity. And third, use metrics to drive improvement conversations, not as a cudgel for performance reviews.
And I'd add, listen to your developers. If they're telling you a metric feels unfair or is causing unhealthy behaviors, take that seriously. The goal should be creating an environment where great work can happen, not optimizing for dashboard numbers.
Couldn't have said it better myself. If your metrics are creating anxiety and competition rather than clarity and improvement, something's wrong with the metrics, not the developers.
Well, this has been an illuminating dive into the world of developer metrics. If you're a tech leader listening to this, I hope we've given you some food for thought about how to approach measurement in your organization.
And if you're a developer being measured by some of these metrics, maybe share this episode with your manager.
Subtly, of course. Oh, I just happened to be listening to this fascinating podcast.
That explains why counting my GitHub commits might not be the best way to evaluate my work.
That's all for today's episode of Innovation Pulse. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts.
Until next time, keep innovating. We've explored how Anthropic and Affiniti are making waves in the tech industry with their innovative solutions and impressive growth, and delved into the complexities of measuring software developer productivity, advocating for balanced and outcome-focused metrics. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends and colleagues so they can also stay updated on the latest news and gain powerful insights. Stay tuned for more updates.